Story number 1. My friends and I used to live really close to a national forest. It was just a 10-minute bike ride from my house. And living in a boring small town with nothing better to do, we often spent our free time exploring the woods. We didn't know the directions very well, and we didn't have cell phones with Google Maps back then either. So it definitely wasn't the safest hobby. But after years of going out there, we'd grown pretty familiar with the area. At the time, I was just 15 years old. It was the first day of summer break. One of my closest friends, Jason, was celebrating with me by having a sleepover at my place. We were probably just going to play Xbox all night. But just after midnight, the power went out. My dad woke up and tried to fix it, but it turned out to be a neighborhood-wide outage. There was nothing we could do. Neither of us were tired, though. We had just chugged energy drinks about 30 minutes earlier, planning to pull an all-nighter. After a few minutes of boredom, Jason suddenly asked, "Have we ever been in the forest at night?" It was a weird, random question, but even weirder was the fact that no, we actually hadn't. Despite living here all our lives, despite exploring those woods for over a decade, not once had we gone out there in the dark. Curious and a little hyped, we grabbed my empty backpack, tossed a couple of flashlights inside, and hopped on our bikes. We rode to the usual spot where we always entered the forest. It was a dirt circle right off the road where we usually left our bikes. As we parked them, we noticed a car further up the road. It was some old SUV. It looked like it might have broken down, but all the lights were off, so we figured it had been abandoned. We tossed our bikes down and stepped into the trees. The moment we entered, we had to pull out our flashlights. It was pitch black inside. Outside the woods, the moonlight had been bright enough to light the road. But under the forest canopy, it was total darkness. I'm not even sure why we were so interested in going at night. I guess it was just because we never had before. We wanted to do something new, get a little adrenaline rush. And it only took a few minutes for that rush to kick in. When we looked back, we couldn't even see where the road met the trees anymore. It was just shadows behind us. The forest ambience at night was strange. Cool, but creepy. The sounds of crickets, rustling leaves, and distant snaps of twigs echoed around us. But as we kept walking, our excitement started to wear off. I don't know about Jason, but I was starting to feel really uneasy. The adrenaline had faded, and now it felt like something was actually wrong. I couldn't explain it, but that sense of adventure was being replaced by something else. Something off. Silence. We stood there, just listening to the eerie and unsettling sounds of the woods all around us. Every creak and rustle felt sharper now. The forest, which had always been a place of fun and freedom, suddenly felt unfamiliar, even threatening. We moved our flashlights around slowly, scanning the trees. Then, we heard it. A stick snapped to our left. The sound echoed sharply through the stillness. Both of us instinctively swung our flashlights in that direction, and that's when we saw him. There was a man standing about 40 feet away. Jason and I froze. Completely. It was immediately clear how strange and wrong it was for someone else to be out there at this hour. Especially a man who looked like that. He had on a black leather jacket and a cap pulled over long, unkempt hair. But it was his eyes I remember the most. They were wide open. Disturbingly wide. Unblinking. For what felt like 10 full seconds, we just stood there, staring at him, while he stared right back. That's when we noticed something else. He was holding a shovel. Jason leaned over and whispered to me in a low, nervous voice. "I think we should go. Like, right now." That was all I needed to hear. I snapped out of my daze and we both turned and hurried away, back the way we had come. We didn't run, but we moved fast. We covered our flashlights with our shirts to make them dimmer, just in case he was trying to follow us. Every sound behind us made our hearts race faster. Eventually, we made it back to the edge of the forest where we had left our bikes. But when we got there, something was different. The SUV we had seen earlier? It was gone. No sign of it. No headlights. No taillights. Nothing. We didn't stick around to figure it out. We jumped on our bikes and rode straight back to my house. I really wish we had told someone about what happened. But honestly, I don't think it would have made a difference. We hadn't seen enough to describe the man properly. Or even the make or model of the SUV. After that night, I never went back into those woods again. Because I think if we had stayed even a few minutes longer, or been just a little closer when we first saw him, we might not have made it back at all. Story number 2. I own a cabin in Idaho right along the western edge of the Rocky Mountains. It's nothing fancy, just a small, quiet place tucked deep into the forest, surrounded by trees and mountain views. I usually go there a couple of times a year just to get away from everything and reset for a few days. This happened back in 2019. I had just driven 8 hours north to reach the cabin and finally pulled in around 8 p.m. The last mile of the trip was down a narrow dirt road that tends to grow over if it's been a while. But this time I made it without any trouble. I got out, stretched my legs, and walked around to the side of the cabin to turn on the generator. Once the place had power, I started hauling my luggage out of the truck and up the steps to the front door. As soon as I unlocked the door and stepped inside, I noticed it was colder than usual. I flipped on the lights, and that's when I saw the reason why. One of the windows in the back of the living room was broken. Not cracked, shattered. Glass was scattered all over the floor, glinting in the lamplight. I stood there for a second, heart racing, just taking in the scene. A million thoughts ran through my head. I immediately walked through the rest of the cabin, checking each room. Everything was exactly as I had left it. Nothing was missing. No signs that anyone had been there. So I figured maybe it had been an animal. Possibly even a curious grizzly. The area's known for them, and I'd heard of them pawing at windows before. Since everything else in the cabin seemed untouched and in working order, I tried not to let it bother me too much. I finished unloading my bags and realized it was too late to drive back into town for a replacement window. So I did what I could. I grabbed an old throw blanket and nailed it up over the broken glass. Then I stepped back outside one last time, gathered a few armfuls of firewood, and brought it in. Once I had a fire going in the old stone fireplace, the place warmed up quickly. I laid down on the couch, opened a book, and started to relax. Despite the broken window and cold start, the soft sounds of nature drifting in through the makeshift cover were oddly peaceful. Crickets, wind in the trees, the occasional pop from the fire. It didn't take long for sleep to creep up on me. By around 11 p.m. I was yawning. I got up, added more wood to the fire so it would stay warm through the night, then shut off the lights and headed into the bedroom. I set my alarm for 7 a.m., climbed into bed, and drifted off. But sometime in the middle of the night, my body jolted awake. I sat straight up, heart pounding, disoriented. I turned toward the nightstand and saw the time glowing on the clock. 1:24 a.m. I didn't know why I had woken up so suddenly. My heart was racing like I'd just been running. It didn't feel like a normal dream or a restless night. It felt abrupt, like something had yanked me out of sleep. The cabin was silent. All I could hear was the soft, steady crackling of the fire in the other room. There was still a faint crackling sound from the firewood in the living room. I got out of bed and slowly walked to the bedroom door. My body felt heavy, my heart beat loud in my ears. Carefully, I opened the door and looked out. The red-orange glow of the fireplace was enough to light the short hallway ahead of me. That's when I noticed something. The blanket I had nailed over the broken window had fallen. And then I saw the muddy boot prints. They were all over the blanket. My eyes followed the tracks. They came straight through the broken window into the cabin. The prints led across the floor, into the hallway, and directly toward the spot where I was standing. I slowly turned my head, following the path behind me. The boot prints went right up to the door of the bedroom I had just come out of. A chill ran through my entire body. I walked slowly back toward the bedroom, and that's when the true horror set in. The tracks didn't stop at the door. They went inside. They led right up to the side of my bed. My chest tightened. My hands were shaking. Panic set in. I didn't know what to think. Did someone come in while I was asleep and just leave? Or were they still inside? I stared at the floor, my mind racing. And that's when I noticed something even worse. There were no boot prints leading away from the bed. Only the ones going in. I felt lightheaded. My legs nearly gave out. Almost without thinking, I knelt down to look under the bed. And before I could even bend all the way down, I saw it. The outline of a hand. My breath caught in my throat. I stumbled back, eyes wide, heart thundering in my chest. Pure terror took over. I spun around and slammed into the doorway as I scrambled to get out. My shoulder hit the frame hard, but I didn't stop. I dashed into the living room, grabbed my car keys off the counter, and bolted through the front door. I didn't even think to grab my phone. I jumped into the truck and drove fast, down that long dirt road, not stopping until I reached town and pulled into the police station. It was about an hour later when the officers and I returned to the cabin. Whoever had been inside was gone. There were no signs of where they had gone. No more tracks. No evidence they had taken anything. Just those muddy footprints and the memory of that hand. To this day, I don't know exactly what happened that night. My best guess? I must have woken up because whoever it was had crawled under the bed and accidentally bumped into something. Maybe the wall. Maybe the nightstand. But why they were there or what they intended to do, I have no clue. That was 5 years ago. For the next 2 years, I couldn't bring myself to return to the cabin. The thought of being inside it again made my skin crawl. I even thought about selling it, but I couldn't. I couldn't risk something happening to whoever bought it next. I didn't want that on my conscience. So I took down the listing, and since then, the cabin has sat abandoned. Empty. At least, I hope it's empty, but I'm almost certain that during that time, it's had some unwelcome visitors. Story number 3. Back in 2021, I took a road trip to Maine. I had never been before, but I'd saved a few camping trails that I was excited to explore. I didn't even bother booking a hotel. I figured I'd just camp the entire time. That was the plan. A very flawed plan in hindsight. I drove straight up with the idea of reaching the trailhead and setting up camp before dark. But things didn't go quite as expected. I arrived much later than I had hoped, around 5 p.m., and the sign at the trailhead said it was a 4-hour hike to the campground. Not ideal. Still, I had a headlamp and my gear packed, so I wasn't too worried. Though, to be honest, it would have been a lot nicer not to feel so rushed. One thing that stood out immediately, there were no other cars at the trailhead. None. Which meant, as far as I could tell, I'd be the only person on the trail. The only one camping out there that night. I started moving quickly, trying to cover as much ground as I could while there was still daylight. I walked fast enough to make time, but not fast enough to risk injury on the uneven terrain. About 2 hours into the hike, the sun had begun to sink. By 8 p.m., it had mostly set. The trail was now dim and shadowed, the forest canopy above blocking what little light remained. I decided to take a quick break before pushing through the final stretch. I stepped off the path and found a fallen tree to sit on. Took off my pack, drank some water, and pulled my headlamp out of the side pouch. As I strapped it on, I suddenly heard something. Leaves crunching behind me. It wasn't loud, but it was clear footsteps or something moving through the dry brush. I froze. My headlamp wasn't turned on yet, but I clicked it quickly and swung the beam around behind me. Nothing. At least nothing within the range of my light. I stood up slowly, scanning the trees, the trail, the brush. Silence. The sound had stopped as suddenly as it began. I held my breath and listened. All I could hear now was the faint rustle of wind in the trees, and my own heart beating in my chest. It was quiet now. What I'd heard earlier definitely sounded like footsteps, but I hadn't heard enough to be sure. Could have been anything. Probably just a deer or some small animal. That's what I told myself, anyway. I stood up, adjusted the strap on my headlamp, and got moving again. As I continued down the trail, the darkness deepened with every step. Within 30 minutes, I couldn't see any landmarks or distant hills anymore. The woods had swallowed everything. The only thing I could see was whatever fell inside the narrow tunnel of light coming from my headlamp. So I focused hard on the trail, on making sure I stayed on it, didn't trip, didn't lose my footing. But every so often, I'd stop in my tracks, because I thought I heard footsteps again. Each time I'd freeze, swing my light around. Wait, listen. But there was nothing. No movement, no sound. Just the wind, the occasional creak of branches, and the ever-present chirping of insects. It started to get into my head. I couldn't tell if I was just paranoid or if something was actually out there. Watching me. Following me. I tried to stay calm, but the feeling in my gut said otherwise. By the time I hit the 4-hour mark, the time it was supposed to take to reach the campground, I was uneasy. I should have arrived already. And now I had another problem. I didn't know how much battery life my headlamp had left. It had to be running low. The thought of losing light out here, alone in the woods with whatever might be stalking me, it made my skin crawl. And then it happened again. I heard it. Another footstep. But this time it was close. Way too close. It sounded exactly like the crunch of a human footstep on dry leaves and twigs. I stopped and turned on instinct, my heart slamming in my chest. I spun around, pointing my headlamp into the trees behind me. But once again, no one was there. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling this time. It felt different. Like I wasn't just being followed, I was being hunted. The trees, the brush, there were too many places to hide. And with this weak little headlamp, I could only see about 20 feet ahead. Hello? I called out, my voice shaking. Is someone out there? Nothing. Only the insects chirping, louder than before. Almost like they were trying to drown out something else. I started slowly backing up, still facing the direction the sound had come from. 10 paces. Then 11. And then, off to my right, I heard another footstep. Soft. Careful. I snapped my head toward the noise, moving the beam of my light. And that's when it happened. One of the bushes jerked violently. Leaves rattled. Branches snapped. And in that split second, I saw something. A leg. A person's leg mid-sprint vanishing into the trees as they bolted deeper into the woods. I froze. My entire body locked up. I couldn't move, couldn't think. But after a few long seconds, my mind snapped back and I started moving. Fast. I didn't run, I didn't want to make noise, but I put as much distance between myself and that spot as I could. About a mile up the trail, I found a small hollow off the path where I could tuck myself in and discreetly camp for the night. I didn't set up a tent. Didn't build a fire. I just lay low and stayed silent. I barely slept, but I never heard anything else. Whoever had been stalking me, they were gone. Or at least, I hoped they were. It was obvious now someone had been following me. Step by step, keeping their distance, waiting for the right moment. And whatever their intentions were, I'm certain they weren't good. I kept thinking, what if I had made it to the campground? Would they have followed me there? Waited for me to fall asleep? Or worse, would they have already been there? In the morning, as soon as the sun came up, I packed up what little I had and started hiking straight back to my car. I didn't stop to rest, didn't eat, didn't even look back. As far as I know, I lost them. And as far as I know, I got lucky.